At Christmas dinner, my son David raised his glass and smiled like nothing was wrong. The room was full. Laughter, clinking plates, shiny gift wrap on the floor. Then he said it. "We voted, and you're no longer part of this family." Just like that. The room didn't fall silent. They laughed like it was a game, but it wasn't. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and slid it across the table toward him. "Here," I said, "a parting gift." He didn't know yet, but I wasn't the one being dismissed. "Thank you for sitting with me for a moment. I don't know where you're listening from or what brought you here today, but if you've ever poured your time, your care, your strength into a home that slowly forgot your name, then you already know how it feels. If you've ever sat at a table you set only to be treated like a stranger, then you understand why silence can feel louder than shouting. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever looked around a room full of people they love and wondered when exactly they stopped being seen. Maybe it crept in slowly. Maybe it hit you all at once. But either way, it leaves a mark. And if you've been there, if you've felt that quiet ache, that sharp breath you couldn't explain, then I hope you stay. I hope you hear something true in what I'm about to tell you. Because you're not the only one. Not by far. I didn't always sit at the edge of the room. Once I was the one setting the table, folding the napkins just right, baking the pies from scratch with a cracked old cookbook and sore feet that didn't complain. My name's Eleanor, and for most of my life, I've worn the quiet kind of strength, the kind you don't notice until it's missing. I raised my son David by myself after his father passed. We didn't have much, but I stretched every dollar until it sang. I worked morning shifts at the grocery store, evening hours cleaning offices, and in between, I was just his mother. I packed his lunches, ironed his little shirts, taught him to tie his shoes, and made sure there was always a warm light waiting for him, no matter how dark the world outside became. Christmas used to be our favorite. We had this little ceramic angel that went at the top of our tree, chipped on one side, but it was ours. I remember one year I couldn't afford wrapping paper, so I used old newspaper and tied the packages with twine. He didn't care. He just smiled and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. That's how it was, just the two of us, a team. Then things changed slowly at first. He got older, and I stepped back like all mothers do. He got married a few years ago to Vanessa. She was polite in that distant kind of way, always smiling without really looking at you. I tried to welcome her. I really did. Made her favorite dishes. Gave her space in the kitchen. Even handed over the role of hosting holidays when she said it would be less chaotic that way. I thought it was just a new season. But some seasons don't pass. They settle in like frost on the windows and never quite melt. They started calling me old-fashioned. I heard it once in passing, Vanessa whispering to someone on the phone, saying I meant well, but had outdated expectations, that I was clinging. David never corrected her. He just laughed and said, "That's just Mom." Like I was a running joke, like the years I spent holding him through fevers and heartbreaks had somehow turned into a punchline at my expense. Still, I stayed kind. I stayed helpful. I kept showing up, hands full of gifts, dishes, and hope. And every time I did, I could feel the space between us grow. It's strange how someone can live in the house you built and still make you feel like a guest in it. But I told myself it was just transition, just life moving on. I told myself that love doesn't always look the same as it used to. I didn't know back then that they'd already started locking the doors behind me. The first crack didn't come with a fight or a harsh word. It came in silence. Days before Christmas, when the lights had already gone up and the music played on every corner, I realized something was off. My phone sat quiet. No message, no invitation, nothing. I thought maybe they were waiting. Maybe something last minute. Maybe they'd call me when it was time. But time kept moving and nothing came. It wasn't until my neighbor, sweet Mrs. Patterson from across the hall, stopped me in the stairwell, smiling with her arms full of wrapped gifts, that I even knew the dinner was happening. She asked me if I needed a ride to David's house, said she'd seen his car packed with decorations the day before. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been invited. I stood there halfway through tying my coat, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear the rest of her words. When I got home, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blinking cursor on my phone screen. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. I scrolled through the family group chat, the one Vanessa had taken over months ago, and saw photos already posted of the tree, the table being set, the wreath I had made last year still hanging on their front door. But not one word to me. Not even a line. I finally called David. My voice was calm, almost too calm, like I didn't want to sound hurt, even though my whole chest was burning. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, casual. "Hey, Mom," he said like everything was normal. I asked him if Christmas dinner was still on. He hesitated for a second, just enough to notice, then said, "Oh, yeah, of course. We just figured you knew. Vanessa thought she added you to the message. Must have been a mix-up." A mix-up? As if years of tradition of holding the holiday together with worn hands and hope could be undone by a technical error. As if my name could just fall off the list like a misplaced ornament and no one noticed. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I'd raised him better than that. He knew how to double-check things. He knew how much these dinners meant to me. That night, I sat by the window and watched the snow fall under the streetlight. I thought of the times I used to shovel the walkway before he got home from school. How I'd warm up hot chocolate and wrap his wet socks in towels fresh from the dryer. Now, I was outside the circle looking in. Something had shifted. Something I couldn't quite name. But I felt it. And once you feel that cold, it doesn't leave. Not right away. Not even when the invitation finally comes. Too late and too forced to feel like anything but an afterthought. When I finally arrived at their house, the driveway was full. Cars lined up on the curb, the porch light glowing warm like a postcard scene, and laughter spilled through the cracks in the front door before I even knocked. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering just above the doorbell, telling myself this was family, that no matter how I felt in my chest, this was where I belonged. Vanessa opened the door. Her smile was quick, almost automatic, like someone posing for a picture they didn't want to be in. She stepped aside and waved me in without touching my arm or saying a word beyond. "Come in." I stepped into a house that used to feel like an extension of my own. The scent of glazed ham and cinnamon drifted through the hallway. Candles flickered gently from the mantel, and the tree stood tall, glittering with ornaments. I recognized some of them ones I had made with David when he was just learning how to hold scissors. Voices danced around the living room full of cheer and inside jokes. Plates clinked. The television played soft holiday tunes in the background and children ran between legs with frosting on their cheeks. It looked perfect, almost too perfect. My coat was taken and draped over a chair in the hallway, but no one offered to help me out of it. No one asked how I'd been or what I brought. I carried a pie, still warm, wrapped in the same towel I'd used for decades, but it sat untouched on the counter behind a tower of catered desserts with glossy little labels. I looked for my seat, scanning the long table draped in red and gold, and I saw it. My name not written on a place card like the others, but scribbled faintly in pencil on the back of a napkin set at the far end where the corner met the wall. A folding chair slightly lower than the rest. No cushion, no care. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, trying not to show that I noticed, but I noticed. The gifts were stacked high beneath the tree, names carefully written in metallic pen, bows tied just right. One by one, the children were called to open theirs. Then the adults. Even the dog had a gift bag filled with treats and a tiny sweater that made everyone laugh. I kept waiting, not because I needed something fancy, just a gesture, a candle, a card, a ribbon with my name on it. But my name never came, not even once. Someone passed me a plate when dinner was served, but I noticed I wasn't offered a drink. I poured my own water from the pitcher near the sink. I listened. I smiled. I nodded when spoken to, which wasn't often. I watched David laugh with Robert and Linda, Vanessa's parents. Watched her lean her head on his shoulder, like they were the ones who built this tradition, like I hadn't spent 3 decades laying the foundation for everything they were now enjoying. There's a kind of silence that isn't quiet. It buzzes in your ears. It sits behind your ribs. And that night, I felt it more than ever. I was there. I was dressed nice. I brought food. I brought love. But I wasn't welcome. Not really. Not in the ways that count. I was background, a footnote in a story I started, and they made sure I felt that without ever having to say a word. Dinner had settled into that soft rhythm, the clink of cutlery, the hum of casual conversation, the kind of small talk that feels light on the surface, but carries little warmth underneath. I ate slowly, carefully, tasting the food without really tasting it, nodding politely when someone mentioned the weather or how early the snow had come this year. I watched as Vanessa passed around a tray of sweet potatoes, laughing at something Rachel, her sister, whispered to her. And I noticed how David barely looked my way all evening. Not once did he ask how I'd been. Not once did he ask if I needed anything. I sat there holding my fork, pretending it didn't matter. Then, right as dessert was about to be served, he stood up. He tapped the edge of his wine glass with the back of his spoon, gently at first, then again a little louder until everyone quieted down and turned toward him. He smiled that polished, practiced smile of his, the one I'd seen him wear at company parties, at church gatherings, whenever he needed to perform. I felt my hand still in my lap, my stomach tightening before he even opened his mouth. He cleared his throat and said, "I just want to say how grateful I am to have everyone here tonight. It means the world to Vanessa and me. We've come a long way, and we're really focused on keeping our family strong, peaceful, and healthy moving forward." There were a few nods around the table, murmurs of agreement. Someone raised a glass, and then he kept going. "With that in mind," he said, and paused for just a beat too long. "We had a little conversation earlier this week, and we all agreed this year we're making some changes." He turned to me, still smiling, still calm, and said, "We took a vote and, well, you're no longer part of this family." He said it like he was reading off a list, like it was policy. There wasn't a crack in his voice. There wasn't a flicker of guilt. Just that same polite delivery, as if what he was saying was a favor, a kindness, like I was a stray dog they could kindly release into a new field and wash their hands of. For a moment, I didn't understand the words. I blinked at him. The room had gone so still you could hear someone's fork drop 2 chairs away. Then came the awkward laughter, half-hearted, shallow, nervous. Rachel chuckled. Someone muttered, "He's just teasing." But no one corrected him. No one interrupted. No one said, "That's not funny," or "Don't say that," because it wasn't a joke. I could tell. I looked at his face, at David, at the boy I held against my chest when he had fevers, at the man I cheered for at every school ceremony, at the husband I helped raise when he didn't know how to fold laundry or apologize properly. And I saw nothing behind his eyes but certainty, no shame, no hesitation. Just a man standing before his invited audience, delivering a verdict I hadn't even been given a chance to appeal. I waited for someone to speak, for someone to step in, for a voice, any voice to say, "That's enough." But none came. Even the ones who looked uncomfortable stayed quiet. Their silence was louder than the announcement. They looked at their plates, at the ceiling, at their phones, but not at me. Never at me. And in that moment, sitting at the corner of their long table with my name barely scribbled on a napkin, I realized that the vote had been real. Whether taken aloud or in passing glances, in shrugged shoulders and downcast eyes, the decision had been made. I had been removed. And no one was going to stop it. Not even the boy I once would have walked through fire for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why or try to change his mind. I sat there still as the plate in front of me and let the silence settle around us like dust in a forgotten room. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as my son but as a man I no longer recognized. A man who could stand in front of people and say something like that without flinching. That moment told me everything I needed to know. Not just about him, but about what had already been unraveling for a long time. So, I reached slowly for my purse, resting on the floor beside me. My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I pulled it up onto my lap, unzipped it carefully, and took out a thick envelope. It was marked in dark ink, sealed tightly, and I had folded it with care. I looked at it for just a moment, holding it like it weighed more than paper ever should. Then I slid it across the table gently until it landed just in front of him. He looked down at it, puzzled. One eyebrow lifting like this was the part where I'd plead for understanding or offer some half-hearted apology for existing too long in a space that no longer wanted me. But I didn't do that. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at him with all the stillness I had left and I said, "Here's a parting gift. Merry Christmas." That was all. No bitterness in my voice, no sarcasm. Just those words. Because the truth is, I'd prepared that folder months ago. Not because I knew this exact moment would come, but because I had started to see them more clearly. I had started to notice the way I was spoken to, the way decisions were made without me, the way Vanessa's words slowly overtook his until I couldn't tell where his thinking ended and hers began. I had spent months pretending not to feel the push, not to notice the narrowing space they left for me. But I had. And instead of waiting for them to close the door, I made a plan to step away before it slammed. That envelope wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was clarity written in ink and signed with finality. He didn't know that yet, but he would. And as he stared down at it, blinking like it was some harmless holiday card, I sat back in my chair and watched the air shift just a little around him. He hadn't expected anything from me. That was his mistake. He thought I had nothing left to give. But I had one thing, one final gift, and I gave it without a single tear. He didn't open it right away. He held the envelope like he expected something soft, something sentimental, maybe a letter full of regret, maybe a quiet goodbye. But I wasn't there to beg. I wasn't there to explain. So he opened it, pulled out the papers, looked at the first page, and just like that, the smile left his face. At first, he looked confused, like he didn't understand what he was reading. His brow pulled tight, and he scanned the page again. Then he turned to the next one, and I saw it hit him. His hands stiffened, his shoulders locked, and he looked up at me like he wanted to ask a question, but couldn't find the words. And then he screamed, a loud, broken sound that cut through the room and stopped every fork midair. Vanessa grabbed the papers from him and began flipping through them, her lips moving silently as she read. The guests looked at each other, then at me. No one spoke. No one laughed. Inside that envelope were clean, official papers. The house they thought would be theirs sold. The accounts they were counting on closed. Every cent rerouted to organizations that actually knew how to care for people. And right there, near the top of one page in bold black letters, was the one line that left him breathless. Holiday home title transfer. Approved. The new owner. A women's shelter. Not them. Not anymore. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Everything he needed to know was already in his hands. I watched him hold those papers like they were burning his hands. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Vanessa clutched the edges of the documents, whispering something sharp and breathless as her eyes darted back and forth, trying to find a loophole, trying to undo what had already been done. The others around the table looked frozen in place, not sure if they should speak, not sure if they even wanted to be involved. The room had gone from holiday cheer to a stillness, so thick it felt like time had stopped. I sat there for another quiet moment, not because I was waiting for anyone to speak, but because I wanted to remember it. The stillness, the realization, the way truth settled into the corners of the room like dust no one could sweep away. Then, without a word, I stood up. I reached down and picked at my coat, folding it gently over my arm. I looked toward the kitchen, toward the counter, where the pie I had made that morning still sat untouched, wrapped in the same towel I'd used for years. I walked over and picked it up, still warm, still mine. No one stopped me. Not even him. Not Vanessa. Not the ones who'd laughed along earlier. They just stared, stunned, as if the walls had shifted and they didn't know where the doors were anymore. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need anything from that room anymore. So I walked out calm, quiet, pie in one hand, coat in the other. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cold air, and let it fill my lungs like a breath I hadn't taken in years. The sky was dark but clear. The snow had started falling again, soft and slow. And for the first time in a long, long while I felt light. Not because I had won, but because I had finally let go of the weight I never should have been carrying. The next morning, before the sun even had the strength to rise fully, the phone rang. I sat in my chair by the window, wrapped in the same old robe I'd owned for years, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. I let it ring once, then twice, then 3 times. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen, his name flashing across it like it meant something new now, like maybe it still held the power to pull me back in. I didn't answer. I let it go quiet. A few minutes later, it rang again and again. Then came the message. His voice rushed tight, trying to sound calm, but shaking just enough for me to hear the panic underneath. "Mom, we need to talk. Please, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." His voice cracked at the end, not because of guilt, not because of love, but because he realized he no longer had control over what he thought he owned. An hour after that, a long message from Vanessa showed up in my inbox. Paragraph after paragraph of explanation. She used words like confusion, miscommunication, tension. She said they were overwhelmed, that things were said in the wrong tone, that maybe emotions got the better of them. She never once apologized. She never once said I was welcome. She just tried to smooth the edges of something they shattered on purpose. I sat quietly and read every word. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because I had finally learned what silence was worth. They said I was creating tension, that I made things uncomfortable. But I was the one who kept the house standing when their world fell apart. I was the one who paid the electric bill when David lost his job and didn't want anyone to know. I was the one who came over after midnight when Vanessa called because their little one had a fever and they couldn't figure out what to do. I was the one who brought groceries, who watched the children for free, who lent money without asking when they said it was just for a week. I never reminded them of any of it. I never held it over their heads. I just showed up quietly, repeatedly. But quiet people get forgotten, especially when they don't ask for anything in return. And one day they looked around and saw only what I didn't give them. Never mind what I had given until there was barely anything left for myself. They called it a vote. They called it peace. But I knew what it was. It was erasure. And what they didn't realize was that by voting me out, they gave me the very thing I hadn't had in years. Permission to let go. So I didn't call back. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to explain. They handed me a verdict. I just signed the release. When I got back to my apartment that night, the warmth inside felt different. Not loud, not full, but honest. It was quiet in the way that calms your chest, not in the way that makes you feel forgotten. I slipped off my shoes by the door, set the pie down on the counter, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without speaking, just listening to the faint hum of the heater, the creak of the building settling, the sound of stillness I hadn't been allowed to feel in their house. The next morning, I stepped out onto the small balcony just off my kitchen. The cold air kissed my skin, but I didn't pull away. I brought out the planter box I had tucked away months ago, thinking I wouldn't have time to care for it with everything they had me running around for. I filled it with fresh soil, loosened it with my fingers, and pressed in the bulbs I'd been saving. They were just tulips. Nothing fancy, but something about putting them in the dirt made my hands feel steady again. Later that week, Amy, my neighbor from down the hall, a sweet young woman with 2 little boys, knocked gently and asked if I wanted help hanging the bird feeder I'd mentioned once in passing. She brought a ladder, and I held the base while she secured the hook. We didn't talk much, just shared a soft kind of company, and when she was done, she smiled and said, "It looks nice here." She didn't know how much I needed that. A few days passed before I heard the knock on my door that stopped me in my tracks. It was soft, like someone who wasn't sure they should even be standing there. When I opened it, there she was, Sophie, my granddaughter, the youngest, the only one who used to sit beside me on the floor when I told stories, the one who always asked about the old photos in the hallway. Her eyes were red, cheeks blotchy, and she didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, trembling a little, then stepped forward and hugged me without asking. She whispered that she didn't know they were going to say those things, that she hadn't agreed, that she didn't vote. I held her close and told her she didn't have to explain. Not now, not here. I made us tea, and we sat in the kitchen for a long while, her hand in mine. both of us too tired to pretend. It was then I realized something that settled deep in my bones. I didn't lose a family. I lost a performance. I lost the version of them they wanted me to accept without question. The masks, the politeness, the scheduled kindness. And in its place, I found something small but solid. Truth. Not everyone left. Not everything broke. Some things, the things that matter, remained. I didn't have a table full of guests. I didn't have a mountain of presents or a long speech to give. But I had my name back, my peace, and the space to water something that would bloom come spring. If they ever looked you in the eye and told you that you no longer belong, if they dressed it in soft words or polite smiles, but still pushed you out of the circle you built with your own hands, know this. You never needed a vote to prove your worth. Your presence is not something others get to approve or deny. It is not up for debate. It is not fragile. It stands whether they see it or not. I used to think that love meant holding on no matter how tightly it pressed against your chest. That family meant staying quiet, accepting less, shrinking yourself for the sake of peace. But I've learned that real peace doesn't come from being allowed to stay. It comes from choosing to walk away when staying costs too much. So if they ever made you feel like the extra seat, the afterthought, the burden, I want you to hear this. You are not less. You are not late. And you are not invisible. Some people will only see what they want from you. And when you stop giving it, they'll act like you disappeared, but you didn't. You're still here, and you are allowed to start again. If someone ever tried to erase you, if they acted like your memories didn't matter, if they told your story without including your name, and if you've ever had to walk away quietly with your head up just to finally be seen, then know you're not alone. Because here, we don't forget who we are. I didn't scream. I didn't slam the door. I didn't ask them to change. I just handed them the truth and walked toward peace. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. More love from Granny.